This is a DeLorean DMC 12, the only car ever produced by DeLorean Motor Company. Despite being a commercial flop, this car has since become one of the most iconic cars of all time. Today, I'm going to take you on a tour of this 80s time machine, going through all the quirks and features. Then we'll get it on the road and take it for a drive. But before we begin, let's go through a brief history. DeLorean, like many companies, was named after its founder, John DeLorean. He was already well known in the automotive spaces for cars like the Pontiac Firebird and the Pontiac GTO. So when he announced he was making his own American sports car, people were pretty excited, especially after he announced that he was teaming up with Lotus to design the body and the chassis of this car. But in 1982, only 2 years to production, DeLorean would go bankrupt, leaving us with only 9,000 examples of this car. This is one of them. We'll start on the outside with its most obvious feature, its stainless steel panels. It's a crazy look that no car had ever done before on any scale. And this is done mostly for two reasons. One, it's expensive, and two, it's extremely difficult to work with stainless steel. But DeLorean decided to do it and create this iconic look. So, now we'll move up front. And the first thing you notice straight away is how low and flat this front is. I mean, if you look at the bumper, it's barely above my knee, and I'm not a tall man. And of course, we got these square headlights and turn signals that are every 80s and 70s car really had. And the other notable thing up here is this symmetrical and iconic DMC logo, also in stainless steel. And if you notice, it's on this short, stubby grill here. But when you look close, you can actually see it's not a grill at all. Actually, there's no pass-through into the trunk here, or into the cabin here, because there's actually no engine up here. This car is rear engine, which we'll talk about later. But because of that, they didn't need a grill, but it would look weird without one, so they slapped one on here and called it done. So, moving around the car, we next have the wheel. The wheel is such an iconic part of this look with these finned and vented wheels. They're the same front and rear, although the ones in the rear are a little bit bigger. Something else you may not know about these wheels is, although there wasn't an option, two different wheels did come on this car. There was an early casting, the deep casting, these wheels here, and a later casting that was a bit more shallow on the 82s and some of the 83s. Some of them are actually even painted a different color, and although it was never an option, there were 3 different wheels that could come on a DMC DeLorean. Now that brings us to one of the more interesting parts of this car, the frunk. Now, opening up this, you can see it's operated by 2 gas pistons right under the hood here, and we actually notice there's a decent amount of space in here. Now, this car happens to have tons of spare parts, because if you're a DeLorean owner, you're gonna need spare parts. But you can see there's actually a nice, decent sized storage space in here that you can fit all sorts of things in. And one of the more interesting features is this small bump at the front. Is it wiper fluid? What is it? It's actually the gas cap. That's right, the fuel tank in this car is in the trunk. Now, some of the earliest cars, actually, the earliest 81s, had a little flap on the hood that allowed you to access this with a locking gas cap, but they wanted to change the car to be more smooth and flat and stylish in the front, so they got rid of it. So if you ever want to get gas in this car, you have to open up the hood and put gas in, as if this car didn't get enough attention. One more thing in here is actually underneath all this stuff, there is a spare wheel in this car, which is amazing because this car is so small. But if you look in here, there is a donut in this car, and if you get a flat, I guess you have to put that on. Now, the funny thing about the donut is it is not the same size as the front wheels or the back wheels, so hopefully your car is just okay being lopsided for a little while. So moving to the rear of this car, we actually find my personal favorite section. I love this rear bumper. I think these taillights are just so classic, so 80s. I just love them. Additionally, you have the DeLorean logo or DeLorean name etched into the bumper. You also have DMC etched into the tailpipes as well. And you have these iconic louvers. Now, as we mentioned earlier, this is actually a rear engine car. So back here we do have the engine. And to lift these louvers, we simply lift this latch and it lifts right up, also on gas struts. Now, we still have one more cover in here, but once we open that cover up, we'll be able to look at the kind of quirky engine that's in this car. Before we open this cover, there actually is one small quirk we can find back here, and that's under the louver, there actually is an etched-in DMC logo. Not many people will ever see this angle of the DeLorean, but now you have. Now with these covers open, we can see the engine, and although it's a V6, which isn't all that strange, what is strange is that it's a 130 horsepower engine made by Volvo, Renault, Peugeot. You don't see a lot of those manufacturers in the United States, so it's kind of weird to see this engine here. This engine actually is in a few US cars like the Dodge Monaco or the Volvo 740, but it's not an altogether common engine to see in the United States, and it's very weird to see it in a sports car. This engine from the factory only made like 130 horsepower, so this car wasn't ever going to be fast, and this certainly didn't help. Although, one thing that did help is that this car is not actually on its original exhaust. It uses an aftermarket performance DMC designed exhaust, but it didn't ship on the car, so I don't think it necessarily really counts. Now, following this trim line we see on the outside of the car, we find ourselves at the door. And there are two strange things about the door before we even open. The first thing is this absolutely tiny mirror. I can cover the whole thing with my hand, and this car is so low, it has such poor visibility. These tiny mirrors, it would look weird if they were bigger, but I just can't help, they're so small. It's hard to see anything out of them from the inside. The other strange feature on the outside of this car is this window. As you can see, it has this line running through the middle of it. It's kind of weird, and that's actually because that's the only section that opens. As you can see, this door has a pretty significant curve to it, and they couldn't make glass that would be able to wind down. So they had to settle with this very small opening section that you could reach your hand through maybe. Now the moment you've all been waiting for, opening the gull-wing doors on the DMC DeLorean. Just give it a little lift, and up it goes. This isn't the first car to do gull-wing doors, but man, oh man, if it isn't the best. Now, before we even get into this car, I did want to point out a few small things. When you open the door, you're actually greeted with these little lights in here. Opening these doors is a hazard, so you want to alert the people around you that your doors are up. So, DeLorean includes these little lights. These are actually off right now. I have the battery disconnected to save power while I'm going around this car with all the doors open. But normally these would be shining, you know, yellow and red, and you'd be able to see them from a decent distance away. The other thing is this leather strap. Now, obviously, as you can see, it's actually quite a reach from the interior of the cabin to the door. So they give you this grab handle so that once you're inside, you can pull the door back down. Now, with the gull-wing doors open, you can see a couple things right away. You can see the DeLorean logo on the door sill as well as the floor mat, but you can also see the parking brake protruding in the way. It's really odd they put this here. You have to get over it every time you get in or out of the car. I can't think of a reason why you'd want it there, but there it is. Next, we get to close the doors, and it's simple as reaching up, grabbing the strap, and pulling it down. Closing the door is very satisfying, and now we can see there's AC vent in the door, which is nice, as well as a mirror control, a door lock, and a lever to reopen the door, which is also very satisfying. Once the door is closed and you're sitting in this car, you find that the interior is quite comfy. These seats are relatively plush with a lot of foam padding and bolstering, and it's all it's all wrapped in this nice black leather. And actually, there's something I should point out: the leather in this car is actually in really good shape for its age. This car is almost 45 years old, and the leather still smells new. Everything's fine. There's no cracks, no rips, no tears. And I found out why. Looking at the dashboard of this car only has 20,000 original miles. This car is in remarkably good shape for its age, and especially for a DeLorean. Another thing is, you notice these really friendly looking latch releases. They're just orange, and they say press on, and they make a very satisfying click and unclick sound. One thing I found in this car is it's actually decently roomy. I have the seat pretty far forward, and I have plenty of leg room, also above my head. I happen to know John DeLorean was quite tall, so he made this car that could fit him, and I can see why there are these big dimples in the roof that make it easy for someone tall to fit into this car. The interior there is very standard for the time. There's nothing a lot that really stands out other than what's not here. No cup holders. I guess if you wanted a drink, buy a different car. The next thing you notice in this car is the steering wheel. It's right in front of you here, and it's very simple actually. There's not a whole lot going on. There's no logo, no airbag. The horn is actually, like on a lot of these cars, on the steering stock. So in case you've ever wondered what the horn sounds like in DeLorean, it sounds a little something like this. So moving to the actual gauges and stocks here, the turn signal stocks are nothing special. They click normally like they do in any other car. They press forward to turn the brights, and you have the wiper stock on the other side that has two settings and a instant setting to just do it once, as well as the sprayer function. And the next thing you notice is the gauge cluster, and well, actually you don't notice a lot about it because the steering wheel is massively in the way. If you put your hand here, it actually blocks even more, so you can only see about half the RPM and half the speedometer, and I can't really see the temperature or the fuel. I have to look around it, but yeah, it's actually pretty sufficiently blocked by the steering wheel. In here we have a DMC logo, and actually if you notice the door ajar button, or the door ajar light, is a little DeLorean with gull wing doors. It's pretty neat. Next we do the gauge cluster. It's very, very typically 80s in here. There's not a lot going on. We have controls for the lights, controls for the temperature, we have a control for fan speed. Not a whole lot different from any other car. The only odd thing is this AC control, which makes a lot of weird noises even when the battery is disconnected. I disconnect the battery in this car because I have the doors open and the lights on all the time, but it still makes a lot of strange noises. Here, take a listen. I don't know why it makes that noise, but it does, and it's weird, and it's a DeLorean. Next down here we have this unlabeled switch, which didn't seem to do anything when I had the battery on or off. I kept the battery off most of the time, but I checked with the battery on, it didn't seem to do anything. I had to consult the owner's manual. The only thing, consulting the owner's manual, I found out it's actually a dimmer for the lights on the gauge cluster, which is a very specific but odd feature that you can only find here in the DeLorean. Next we have a small digital clock here. It works just fine. We also have your very 80s cigarette lighter. DeLorean knew their clients. Just behind it we have this small cover here, and if you lift the cover off you find your window and rear defroster controls. It uses these really big buttons. You'll find kind of similar ones to the door locks and the opening latch, but it has these huge buttons, and they have, you know, down, up for the windows, as well as a rear defroster that comes on with a satisfying click. And two blank switches. I'm amazed there are blank switches in this car. This car only had two options from the factory, either a black or gray interior, this one's black, and a manual or automatic transmission, this one being a manual. So there is nothing these switches could be. They're just blank, and you just have to deal with it. Up next we have the ashtray. There is a small ashtray and a storage void in this compartment, this car. They're not very big, and you wonder why, because it has this huge console, and that's because the transmission runs through here. They had to put it here because the car is so low, so you have this big thing here, and it actually is funny because it puts about a foot between you and your passenger, and it makes a pretty convenient armrest though. Another odd thing about this car is the dome light. It's a little light right here between the mirrors, and you just push it forward or backward to turn it on. You can't have it turn on directly down. You're either going to look at your gauge clusters, maybe at a map, or maybe behind you if you want to put it flat here, but there you have it. As I mentioned, this car is actually a stick shift. It's a manual. It's a very, you know, typical 5-speed for the time. Nothing really that strange about it. The only things that I can find that are kind of strange is the clutch is extremely heavy. I find myself pushing with 20-30 pounds of force to get this thing down, and from there it's a very standard clutch or gearbox. There's something weird going on here. I do find that it's a little wobbly, but it is a 45-year-old car. It is going to be like that. The weird thing in this car is reverse. I've seen, you know, you twist it and push it forward for a Lamborghini, or you push it down and you do something else. In this car you have to pull it up all the way to the left and straight back towards you, and it's in a really weird position, but that's how you get into reverse in a DeLorean. Passenger side of this car isn't any different from any other car. You got your glove box, although the glove box is mounted above the dash and not below it, mostly because the car is so low you never be able to get into it. But it's not that strange. You have some speaker grates up in the front, and looking behind the seats in this car, you actually find that there's a pretty decent storage space with this cargo netting. And there's room back there for a couple backpacks or things. I've been having my camera gear back there. It's quite a convenient spot. The only interesting thing is the technical manual and the parts catalog. Now, those aren't things that normally come with a car, but this owner felt they needed them in here, so you have them. I guess they're going through a lot of spare parts in this car. In this car, they also have the owner's manual, which I did take a peek through. Nothing really particularly strange in there, except one note about cleaning the car. They say if you get grease on your car that you should be cleaning it with gasoline, which I found strange, but I guess, hey, if your car is stainless steel, gasoline isn't going to hurt it. Lastly, the last thing in this car that's interesting is behind the driver's seat. If you lift the driver's seat away, you actually find there's a storage void back there that's pretty decent. I suspect you could fit a kilogram of your favorite 80s party favor back there, if you were so inclined. And that's it for the quirks and features of this car. Now let's get it on the road and take it for a drive. So drive in the DeLorean. Let's get started and let's get it on the road. Key is pretty simple. It's not different from any other car key in the world. Just put it in, twist the ignition, and the car starts right up. First impressions of this car, just in general, are visibility in this car is extremely poor. You have, a hood that's 1.5 miles long, and you're seated so low that you can barely see over it. And the other impression of this car is that it's extremely heavy. The clutch is heavy, the steering is heavy, and it's a manual steering car, that's no surprise. But this car weighs so much. It's got all these stainless steel panels that look incredible, but they make this car handle a bit like a stuck pig, to be honest. And don't get me wrong, this car is such an icon and such a joy. It's such an honor to drive this car. But man, oh man. If you're looking for a car with, performance and, real driving credibility and a good drive quality, this probably isn't your car. So I've made a little bit of opinion driving around just very briefly, and I can tell this car is such a fun car to drive, but it is not at all a fun car to drive. And let me explain that. This car, it's a time machine. This car is such an example of just ridiculous 80s design and style. And I mean, looking at this interior and having things around you, it makes me nostalgic for a time I wasn't even alive for. But at the same time, this car is not good to drive. The steering is heavy, the brakes are mushy, the throttle is vague. The steering is, I can move the wheel, I don't know if you can see this, but the car doesn't turn. It's got a decent amount of play. And even when you do turn it, it's heavy. I mean, this car is way heavier than, any sports car has a right to be. And it's underpowered. So you just get this really kind of lethargic response. And the clutch in this car it's so heavy. I mean, I've driven a couple stick shift cars, and most of them are, dime a dozen. This one's good, this one's bad. This one is just unbelievably heavy. Like, now I do have some bias. I probably drive one of the best car clutches around. I have a Mazda Miata as my daily driver, so this is nothing like that, obviously. But I am pushing to get this car into gear. Now, I'm not sure it compares to other cars that have notoriously heavy clutches, think like a Countach, but I can safely say, this is it's a heavy car, and it's beast to handle, and it doesn't really have any performance to speak of that would redeem it otherwise. So, all in all, it's just a kind of a confused car. But man, this car is fun to be behind the wheel of. I have never, ever, ever seen a car get this kind of attention. I mean, everywhere I go, everywhere I stop, people are pointing, people are looking, people are coming up to ask questions. I don't know if you noticed, but I actually filmed in 2 different locations during the review because so many people were talking to me that I had to move so I could actually get this review done. And it's just like, wow. I've seen cool cars before, but I've never seen a car that encourages people to stop and talk to you like this car does. It's something I've never experienced in any other car, and I think that's what makes this car special. Because the weird thing is I guess a lot of cars are iconic and recognizable. And if you're driving a Diablo down the street or an Aventador, everyone's like, oh man, cool Lamborghini, and car guys will come up to talk to you. But driving this car, you get a much wider variety of people. It's movie buffs. It's kids who've seen Back to the Future, as a child, or people just not sure what it is because, frankly, this car just looks so, ostentatious, really. So car people or otherwise, will stop and will talk to you. I mean, you can't hardly get through anything. Like, I brought this car briefly to my own home to get some gear, and I didn't even get off my driveway before one of my neighbors came up to talk to me about it. And, you know, going through the neighborhood, you know, people are like, oh, DeLorean, you know, and every stoplight, people are driving backwards to get the plate. I'll see if I get permission from the owner to show the plate or not, but he's got a very particularly movie referenced vanity plate, and I've seen people literally back up at traffic lights to take a picture of it today. You know, it's nuts. So it's funny because, like, this car isn't really a joy to drive, but it is a joy to drive this car because, you know, if you don't like attention, don't get this car. It's definitely not for you. But I've never seen a car really pull so many different people into a conversation. And it doesn't help that whenever you're at the gas station, you got the hood open, so people are always like, is it broken down? You know, whatever. But honestly, you can't even get through a gas fill without somebody talking to you. And I will fill this car with gas later, so we'll see if I can catch someone who wants to do that. Hey! It's been around.
If I said yes, it's a little too.
Oh yeah, up, back, and all. Yeah, it's.
Yeah, because you got to lift up and back and all that.
This car also, second gear is kind of goofy. Unless you're going like 10 miles per hour, you can't shift.
This is
down
one
to second.
September.
Up to second, no problem. Down to second, you'll be struggling with it in the parking lot for about 20 minutes.
Yeah.
But yeah, let's talk about the fact that this car, it's a time capsule. I mean, it is so 80s. The things in here are so basic, but I mean, you look in front of you and you see this iconic dash with these manual gauges, and you got the cassette player, and you're freaking laying on the ground in this car. I mean, I'm next to any car and they dwarf me. I'm looking up, you know, it's nuts. And you really get the sensation that you're driving something old and iconic in this car, because it doesn't move like anything else on the road either. Like, that's not necessarily a good thing or a bad thing. It just, driving this, it's so apparent you're not in a regular car. And you can say that about a lot of 80s cars. They all feel kind of similar in some ways, but not like this one. Not like this one. This one, among 80, for instance, actually, I passed a Gen 2 Viper on the way to my filming location, and that guy was breaking his neck to look over at me, which is funny because that guy probably thought, you know, he's the big cheese with his Gen 2 Viper. He's the coolest thing out on the road that day. Little did he count on passing me in the frickin' DeLorean. So it's funny because you'll see guys in Lamborghinis break their necks looking back at this thing. And it's funny because it's not that great of a car. I mean, performance-wise, it's bad. Sales-wise, it bankrupted a company. You know, it's not inherently an interesting car other than the way it looks and that it was in a movie. But man, oh man, apparently that counts for something really special out here. Okay, sorry, I had to pull over to switch batteries. My battery died while I was talking to those guys. I don't know how much you saw, but it actually ended up that 3 guys wanted to stop and chat with me for a minute. But that's just kind of how it goes in this car. And that's really kind of the whole theme of this car too, is the clutch is heavy, the brakes are smushy, the throttle is a little weak, the steering is vague, the shifts are fine, the car runs. But that's not why you drive this car. You drive this car because you can't help but have a smile on your face driving this car. It's so iconic. It's nostalgia in the shape of a running car, and that's just how it is. Everyone loves this car. Everyone smiles at this car. Everyone waves at you when you drive. People stop you at the gas station. They box you in. I actually took a picture. Look, they boxed me in. I could not leave the gas station even if I wanted to. I wanted to be kind of subtle with me taking photos because I didn't want them like, hey, you're going to be in a YouTube video. Especially if I didn't intend to put them in. I just wanted to take a picture of their cars. But the fact is, it is debatably the most recognizable car anywhere you go. People don't have to know cars, you know, it's not a Mercedes or a Lamborghini. It's the Back to the Future car. Look at him driving the time machine. And they'll tell you, they'll talk to you every time. And it's funny because I've never seen a car that is so hyped and epitomized in the public consciousness that's also a shitty car, like a Yugo or something, you know? Because, you know, any of the poster cars in the universe, the Lamborghini Diablos, the BMW M5s, they're all great performing cars except this one. Now you can make an excuse like, you know, BMW i7 or something like that. That's like, oh, that's a very recognizable car. Yes, but people don't know what it is. They know that it's weird. People see this thing and they know, ah, Marty McFly, Back to the Future, that's you. And it makes this car just a real joy to drive, despite the fact that it's no fun to drive at all. It's such a funny car. But that's where we leave this car, you know. It inhabits this unique space amongst car people and sci-fi people that nothing else really does outside of like the Batmobile or something. And you're never gonna see cars like this again with this really unique, weird story about how it came to be, you know. So that kind of leaves this car in the space of, you know, the popularity came too late to save this car, and that is what it is. But that made this car rare, and the fact that it's so sleek makes this car really good. It's gonna be a cult classic forever. And I think that's why you see these cars kind of hold the value they have. Now, they're not worth a ton. They're not going for like crazy, you know, 200 grand or anything like that. But I've seen nice examples of this car go for like, you know, 40, 50, even as high as 6 figures for like a really, really nice one. Now, do I think that's what this car is worth? It's hard to say. But, you know, it's not like you're going to find a whole lot of these things laying around, you know. They're rare. They were rare when they were new, and now most of them, they're all 45 years old. These things are breaking down, and there's not a whole lot of parts to fix these. So I think you're going to see the value of these things rise over time. And, you know, part of it's because it's icon status. Part of it's just because it's the weird silver car with the gold wing doors. And I couldn't think of a better spot to leave this video. So let me pull over and we'll just empty it out. All right, well, let's turn this car off and talk for a minute. Can you see me okay? Yeah. All in all, this car is incredible. It has a fantastic history. It's so weird and quirky, and everything feels odd. You're so low to the ground. The visibility's poor, and at the end of the day, you're driving a DeLorean. I mean, this thing is a riot to drive around. You know, it turns heads, it starts conversations, and at the end of the day, you're the guy driving the time machine. So, if you like the video, please like and subscribe. I really appreciate it. I'm new to the whole YouTube thing, and I hope to make more videos, not only with this car, but any cars, vlogs, all sorts of things. So, take it easy, and I'll see you next time.